we pick up after my brother joined us and we accidentally knocked the recording off. We had a really good conversation when my brother came in and asked about cell phones and how students have access to so much information, why the focus now on books. And the answer we got back in return was kind of both these things may need to be addressed, but we're most concerned about what's happening in the schools. Following that, I had asked Keith Johnson to give me a couple examples of some of the things that he's read in the books. So you're going to come into this next segment, and he's going to start reading some of these. They were a request of what he felt was untoward in those current books. Listen into the second part. This is misunderstood.
When we started this conversation, the first time I spoke to the board in June,
when I jostled some things,
July of
we went out of
2022.
recording. So I'm gonna give you guys a heads up. I lost a little bit of something here when I was moving around.
Are we
Okay.
back?
We're back.
Go ahead, Kathy.
All righty. All right. So, Brian, I just want to go back to what I had said initially when we first started this discussion. And I had, first time I went in front of the school board was July of 2022. And I stated in that I am not talking about banning books, only the removal of books from school libraries. And in July of 2024, Mrs. Weaver stood up in front of the school board, and in her presentation, she said, from September of 23 to May, I think it was, or March of 24, 2,500 books were removed. Middle school and the elementary schools. Middle school had 200 books removed, and the high school had 736 books removed. The elementary school had 3,200 books added. The middle school had 465 books added, and the high school had 460 books added. So this is part of the process. Like media specialists do this all the time: remove books, add books, for various reasons. So if you remove a book, is not banning a book. It's just removing a book. Now, Dr. Seuss has had 6 books banned, and they were so that's something that kind of surprised me when I learned that Dr. Seuss has actually been, and he was actually banned in 2022 from the Reading Across America Day, which happens on March 3rd, which is his birthday, which is why it was picked that day. So he was banned from his own birthday. But anyway, I think, Keith, do you have your information now?
I do. I've got a few. This is the book called Push by Sapphire. And I'm directly quoting, "I think my daddy, he stink. The white shit drip off his dick. Lick it, lick it. I hate that. But then I feel good in hot sauce, hot cha-cha-cha feeling when he is fucking me. Daddy sick me, disgust me, but still he sex me up. I'm nauseous. I'm not in my stomach, but not tight in my twat. My pussy popping like grease in a frying pan. Afterward, I go to fucking room, I smear shit on my face."
Have
you all read the book?
Have you worked with a child who's been abused?
Yes,
All right.
repeatedly.
Is that a behavior you might see in a child who has been abused, smearing feces on walls?
Yes, I've seen that.
And so in this particular portion, so I read Push. Push was one of the books that I worked with. In this particular portion, she has an orgasm and hates the man who rapes her, and her body betrays her.
And it was her father.
And it was her father. All of this is terrible. This whole book, it's like starts bad and gets worse.
Right.
It is an absolutely terrible event.
So what makes you
not
think
her fault?
What makes you think this is something that an 8-year-old should read?
Well, first of all, an 8-year-old won't have access to this book.
I guarantee you, no
Yeah.
elementary school librarian has put this in a library. And furthermore,
So what age is appropriate?
I think really for this book,
Well, this person, I think she was 15 or 16.
yeah,
The age of the character, and for us to deny that stuff like this doesn't take place, To me, a 15 or 16-year-old checking this book out is going to, first of all, the parent is going to be notified. And it's going to cause a conversation with the librarian.
I would hope so. I would think, because
Yeah.
this was also turned into a motion
Really?
picture, but I would much rather
Right.
my daughter have to pass by the librarian to check this book out than to purchase it on Amazon or, because this is somebody who, if they're finding kinship with this character, is somebody who needs to be looked out for. And is not being looked out, specifically in this book, is not being looked out for by her parents. Her parents in this book are the cause of almost all of her trouble. And she is sent to school every day. And because she's not always trouble, because she's, rather not deal with it, she's ignored by the system. And I think a student reading this book would not feel ignored.
So you think these books have some kind of psychological healing on the victims of these crimes?
I don't think that has healing at all. What I think it has is recognition. Is James Baldwin says, the first time you fall in love or have your heart broken, you think you're the only person that it's ever happened to. And then you read a book and you understand that it's a bigger experience.
Well, there's a place.
She's
and
not
time.
the only person. Right. And I do believe the place and time is probably high school and in those libraries is the proper place for push specifically.
Well,
And-
I think we're just going to have to disagree because this is very vulgar. And
It is.
Well,
if it is used, it
But
should
I
be
agree
in
with you on
context.
the vulgar. Yes, but I can't imagine anyone would do. I don't know how you got to the point where instead of reading the book, you are bringing an excerpt up as if somebody's going to be happy about this excerpt. Like, do you believe that there's somebody who would go to this book to find this section for enjoyment?
No, somebody would pick up this book not realizing what it is, and they'd run across it. And that's the intent of putting the book in the school.
But even this part,
But they
wasn't
they
in-
have to get
yeah,
to
they have
this.
to. Yeah, this isn't the preface,
You're
preface
giving
or
giving a
the intro.
librarian far too much responsibility as a counselor. They are not counselors. They are material experts. And,
Right.
And the people that you think you're helping by exposing this to them,
Mm-hmm.
they need more social professional assistance with those issues.
Yes.
Not just left to read a nasty book that may or may not identify with an experience they had, because most of the people that read this kind of stuff didn't have that experience.
Right.
And so,
But the
can I read
librarian,
another?
the librarian is a mandated reporter.
Look, before we challenge these books, the librarians were not reading any of these books, nor should they be required to, because there's just too much volume.
I think those two things are absolutely false.
Well, they've been, let me read, where is the quote? I'll have to pull it out for you from Spotsylvania County, where the superintendent there, when parents started bringing concerns about these books to their attention, they were looking at them and they realized this is terrible, and our parents don't want these things in the schools. So they engaged the community and decided what does the community
Yes.
want or doesn't want. And that's how they went forward with that and trying to say, we had no idea it was there, because how did the school get them? They got these books because the American Library Association typically sends bundles of books to every library. And they'll have this stuff, and the librarian looks over the summary. And they didn't before, but they're using some of the book looks and other resources that kind of rates these books. Of course, we might not agree with their ratings. And then they were just put on the shelves. So the librarians really had no idea that this graphic stuff was there. Understand that,
I can't imagine. I have trouble believing that a librarian wasn't aware of
they
what
weren't,
the book
the
Push,
superintendent of Spotsylvania County Schools said they did not know.
which is why I'm glad my kids go to Franklin County schools.
Well, Franklin County is no different.
I
Our
thought,
librarians,
no, come on now. I think
before this effort, our librarians were not reading these books. They were in the same situation as every other school across the country. They did not know the specific graphic nature of what was in these books. Now the question is, now that we know it's there, what as a community should we do about it? And right now, you're arguing we do nothing.
Well, I think your premise is flawed. Your premise is starting with the idea that librarians are not readers.
They weren't. Now, they told us at the last school
They
board
weren't
meeting.
reading the books. They've admitted that they
Yeah.
don't read the books.
I
go
think
through
they've admitted they
go
haven't
through this
read all of
long
them.
vetting process, but they don't read the books.
It's unreasonable to expect the librarians to have enough time to do their instruction, do the things that they're required to do, and also read dozens and dozens of books every semester, because that's the kind of volume that's coming into the library.
Well, but also they said that they don't read all the books, but they read the majority. They try to any book that comes into their library. They understand the contextual content with it. They utilize other resources. They said common sense media is a big one that they utilize, which me as a parent, I use common sense media before my kids watch a movie, because it tells you the amount of graphic content, the language is so that to me, after hearing the librarian speak, I realized that they are going above and beyond with ensuring that my child doesn't have access to any pornography.
And I think a lot of that has come out of the fact that for 2 years we have been on this. I don't know that vetting process was actually done prior to raising the level of awareness, which community members have done when speaking in front of the school board. That was one of the positives that has come out of all of this that I talked about earlier. That the librarians, and this is what school board members has said at meetings in front of the camera, that all the media specialists are making a concerted effort now to be more aware of the books that they are ordering now. So, I said in my report back in June that 85% of the LGBTQIA plus books has increased from 2020 to 2024 by 85%, whereas other books on minorities have only increased maybe 15%, or witchcraft books or demonism or things, but for whatever reason, that particular genre just was explosive.
Well, I think that we can all attest to.
They are being more. They're being more diligent in exactly what they are putting on the shelves, and I think that's a big positive at this point.
So here's another one, if you want me, Earl, and the Dying Girl. These things from this source has a rating scale from 1 to 5. 5 being the worst. This book is rated a 3, which means it should be acceptable for 10 or 12-year-olds, based on the publisher evaluation. See, somebody else.
Is this a book in one of our libraries?
Yes.
It's in the high school library, or
Yes.
are you saying it's in a? Okay, so you're saying this book should be appropriate for high school students
According to the rating
it's
scale.
according
there.
to the rating. Okay,
Right. If you're, after a while, when you start reading some of this stuff, you realize the ratings are made for what I consider to be children that are too young for that material. And you need to realize that's somebody else's value going into the rating system. It might not match your value. So in this book, the author is Jesse Andrews. So, are you going to eat her pussy? I'm going to eat her pussy. They're eating pussy again. Have to eat some pussy. No, but he didn't teach me how to eat a butthole. Whole lot of pussy. That Pella. Then one day I came home from school and caught that Pella having oral sex with this table from across the street. Relish for that pussy, just holler. It's about the combination of food and sex, like oral sex. Why is Earl combining food and oral sex? Oh yeah, fuck shit. Like my ass cheek. Fuck Aguirre. The wrath of God. Hernez Herzog stick his face all up in my butthole. How the fuck can somebody call themselves bisexual? Then goddamn, there's a whole lot more of that. And they also give you on these reviews counts of things, like different terms. In this case, in this book, it said dick 22 times, fuck 94 times, goddamn 17 times, and pussy 13 times. So how on earth you can consider any of these things to have any kind of educational
Educational value.
So I guess that gets to be the question, is what you have done is read these without context. How do we make sure we teach kids to never do that?
No, that's incorrect. When you're talking about a historical thing like the Civil War, then there needs to be, or a drama, then I can understand your argument. But we're talking about pornography and graphic sexual material. So how many times in one book do you have to read about a man violently raping a woman? How many times in that book do you have to read that before you realize that's inappropriate for young children? I mean, once you read that part, I'm done. There's nothing else in that book that can justify, give it any kind of value, that educational value whatsoever.
Which, again, now this goes back to the book Push, which I'm advocating for, but has exactly what you've said in it. It has at least 4 instances of a pretty graphic description of an adult raping a child. At no point is that ever a good thing in the book. He is terrible.
So what does the
Well,
community say?
that's the book Precious was made into that
Yes.
movie, right? Right. And that was an R-rated movie.
Yes.
And a lot of it that was in the movie didn't make it into the movie.
It could
you know,
not. Uh-huh.
Because it was too graphic.
A lot of it.
My question: have you read the book Push?
I've read most of it.
I guess my question would be: it's easy to pick and choose what you're getting out of the book, especially if you're just reading a list of all the negative in that book. You're really not getting the contextual content from it. But I think the problem would be somebody who would read the whole book and get excitement out of that. That would be more of a problem than somebody reading it and gaining compassion for somebody who is a rape victim and what they've been through. And I think, having a 16-year-old daughter, if she read that book, which I would allow her to read it if she chose, the conversation I would have afterwards.
Well, yes, because you are an engaged parent. Yes.
And the book specifically talks about what happens with a child whose parents are disengaged. So one of the things I think that is true about both of our children is they're going to sit in class with a kid who doesn't speak because they're not comfortable in class, who will immediately fight if they're approached the wrong way. And the book Push describes what draws a child to have that type of behavior. And one of the things I think Push does is it creates more mandated reporters. If my daughter reads that kid that's starting to fight in the class, all of a sudden she's starting to think that
she's got the same
sense.
behaviors. Yeah,
she's got the same behaviors I've seen in that. This is something that should be reported.
Well, I don't disagree.
Coming from a female perspective, gentlemen,
Yes.
and having raised 2 sons, I was very concerned when my boys were growing up that they would have a true respect for young girls and not call them awful names that they've heard or read in a magazine or in a book or seen in a movie. I mean, I was pretty strict with them in that way because women are already being faced with enough as far as being erased in this world that we live in this culture. And by having them being treated and making them think that's normal, that's normalized, that's devaluing women. And sometimes the young men, we talked about earlier, Darnell, that how, young boys get so easily aroused and they get this thing in their mind that, oh, this is what girls enjoy, all the groping and everything. And it's like, no. You respect women And these books don't always convey that message.
But the ones that do, how do we make sure we keep this? Because there are several of these books that describe women being in these situations from the woman's perspective. And as a man, some of it is, if I'm not hearing no, I guess it's a yes. But being able to hear this interior monologue of some of these women in these situations hopefully would create that same kind of thought process in other young men. Because these women may not be fighting you off, but in their head they're going, just get it over with. I don't want to be part of this. They're not, like go out and rape books. These are the consequences of these rapes. They're vulgar and they're horrific, and I think there's something that have occurred for the last forever that we're just now giving women a voice to speak about.
Well, these books are psychologically and emotionally harmful. And as I think Keith said earlier, or maybe it was Brian, I can't remember which gentleman mentioned this, but do we want to err on the side of protection and good, or do we want to err on the side of potential harm? Where do we want to err? How when we're concerned about our children in this culture, in this day and age, and they're going to school and they're going there to get a good education, and the focus, like last night they went on about this literacy program that they're initiating this year in the school, bringing the scores back up and all that kind of stuff, and building the CTE building that may or may not get built, but definitely is needed. I mean, all the good that this board is striving for our children to be successful. Why do we want to put content in front of them that could damage their psyche? Not psychological psyche, that was incorrect.
Well, let me add on to that.
Yes.
What is, if this stuff is okay for children, consider what is the greatest complaint that adults have? What kind of problems do adults have with this kind of material? And I was surprised to learn when I was teaching criminal investigation, I had a youth pastor in my class, and he was taking the classes as part of his ongoing education. And I learned from him that overwhelmingly, the greatest number of complaints from men going to their pastor or pastors asking for help is overcoming pornography. That men can't stop it. And that's to the point to where pornography is, we as men, we have this problem. Women are not known to have it the way men do. But it's to the point to where they allow that to interfere with their other activities in life. They're late to work, they're preoccupied with their mental thinking of what this is. It affects their relationships because it objectifies women instead of being a God-created creature. It's actually something that gives me pleasure, and that's all they look at. And they realize they have a problem. And that is overwhelmingly the single greatest problem that men go to their pastors with to ask for help. So if men have such a real problem with this, then why are we throwing it at our children? Let me give you also on that a little bit. Can we actually do this? Board of Education, Supreme Court case. Board of Education, Island Trees Union Free School School District number 26 versus Pico. This was trying to determine, does a school have the authority to remove library books? And the court said the court created an exception for the removal of library books that are pervasively vulgar or those that are educationally unsuitable. And I would suggest to you, Push clearly fits that category. It's not only vulgar, but it has no educational value. What is it we're teaching these children? You're trying to teach them a social mores when they should be learning the basics. Because where are we in our schools? In the United States and the nations, of the 40 top developed nations, the United States ranks 38 in education, K through 12 education. So U.S. spends more money per pupil than any other country, but we're not getting positive results from that investment. So we are very low ranked, and I think the issue is we're getting away from the things that are necessary to be successful at your job, to learn the things of showing up on time, and to have skills that you can develop and to grow emotionally. We're missing those things because we're focusing on these woke priorities.
I would challenge two things. The first is that we have ever been the top. I have the feeling if you look, the number of industrial nations I think has grown, but for the most part, I have the feeling America's always been middle of the road in terms of our placement educationally amongst industrialized nations. So if we compare ourselves to pre-industrialized nations, which were sometimes larger, India and China in the early 1900s, then we probably looked better testing-wise. And we don't anymore against them because they've now grown into industrial. But if we look back in the day, when we thought we were smarter, there were less industrial nations, and we were still middle of the road, and we were still spending a bunch of money on students. So I don't know that we have diminished our educational system any.
Well, let me add to that as a teacher at Virginia Western, I was teaching college freshman and sophomore level. And the students that I got in, I did that for 10 years. I did it many more years as an adjunct. But it became very clear, the students that came to the college, in my program at least, that had homeschooling or private schooling were several steps ahead of the kids I was getting from public school. And I had no realization of that until I was actually there and saw them in my class taking things. Now, that doesn't mean that public school doesn't have good students come out of it, but overall, the homeschooled students were much better than the public school students.
I think that's true, but I also think it's true for a very unfortunate reason. I think the public schools very much push this idea of a four-year college. And so what tends to happen is you get the less academically astute students who go to community colleges, as opposed to students who are who prefer to remain close, who have a focus on what they already know what they want to do. You don't need to go for 4 years, go to a 2-year college. I think some of our thinking about post-secondary education may have been the reason for this. And if you've been teaching in the last 6 years, because I was one of your students, and so I also have to say there's a pretty good flaw in my planning, which is the CCAP program. And so I know you've gotten several Franklin County students who would have gone to a 4-year college but found it financially advantageous. Were your CCAP scholars of any different caliber?
That I wouldn't be able to give you an informed opinion with regards to CCAP. CCAP was just basically a funding source, is all that was, and Franklin County was part of that, and other jurisdictions also had that opportunity. I would tell you that as far as the 2-year school and the instruction they gave us, statistically, the students that went to a 4-year school for 4 years compared to a student that went to a community college for 2 years and then transferred, transfer students were much more successful in their 4-year degree than someone that goes to a 4-year school initially, and largely because it's probably a social thing. When you're young and you go to a 4-year school, all of a sudden your first time you're free from home and you make your own decisions and you make some poor choices. Whereas at a community college, for the most part, you're still connected to home base, and there's some structure as you learn to mature. There's also something else he told us that 80%, I'm sorry, I lost track of what I was going to tell you to come back to me, but the community college is generally a better choice.
I think so, yes.
As far as educational success. But I have friends that their kids could have gone to a 4-year school. An engineer in Franklin County, he deliberately sent his son to a 2-year school, to Virginia Western first. His son was getting an engineering degree at Tech, but deliberately sent him to Virginia Western first because when he went to Tech for 4 years, he said the first couple of years he had professors that were foreign and he couldn't understand anything they said. And to him, it was a complete waste of money, although he got his degree and he was good at what he did. But he wanted his son to have a better educational opportunity. So he intentionally, even though it was less expensive, he went to Virginia Western first and then went to the 4-year school to get the more detailed, advanced courses.
Yes.
And I'll say, I was going to say that, that was my plan for my oldest, who she's now a junior at Virginia State. She got qualified for the CCAP program. The only reason she didn't follow through with it is because she ended up getting a full ride. But as a parent, it would have been, if she didn't get that full scholarship, it would have been more financially, for us, a better option for her to go through the CCAP program and have 2 years of college paid for.
I think there's just more attention on the students at Virginia Western than what a
Yes.
typical four-year school may provide.
See, now back to stuff we agree, and I think that is one of the failings of not just our public school system, but I think certainly ours, is that we are not encouraging enough of the 2-year colleges. And we also do a good job, though. I will say we offer the students opportunities to gain credits at Virginia Western in their junior and senior years. So you can kind of get started at the college before you get a chance to get started. So we're not terrible, but we've also got room for improvement.
I remembered my 80%.
Okay, beautiful.
80% of students that go to a four-year school will change their major at least once.
Yep.
So once they get into it, they realize that's not for them. But if I can, segue this back to our schools.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've got a much greater problem with our schools than just the vulgar material in the school. That's one of the things that many parents are using as a reason they're taking their children out of our schools. Mm. And let's look at Florida as an example. Where are parents on this? And there's a lot of parents that need more options. Look at Florida. You know, Governor DeSantis in Florida created a school choice program that was much more aggressive than most of the country. So
Mm-hmm.
when the parent decides they want their child to go to a different school, those funds go with it. So it helps the local state funds. I don't know the details, but that makes it easier for the parent to make those decisions on where they want their child to go. And so they've done that for more than a year now, and there's so many parents that have moved their children to alternative education that they're now debating about closing school districts because they're getting a much better product for less money than they do from having the public school option. Now, I'm not advocating that. I would like to see our schools be successful, and I would like them to excel. But unfortunately, there's a bureaucracy involved that is less focused on the student outcomes. There's a desire for student outcomes, but the reality of the bureaucracy sometimes gets in the way. And I think that's true here. You know, years ago, we had this discussion before. Law enforcement, when we had increasing crime back in the 80s, it got to the point, there are some neighborhoods police couldn't even go into. And it was obvious that something had to change. And a lot of police chiefs were dragged kicking and screaming, figuratively, to change how we thought about policing and how we went about the things that we did as a criminal justice system, not just policing. So we ended up in the early 90s, there was major changes in several different aspects, but the most important one that made an influence, if you want to have a safe community, the community needs to be involved in that. So the biggest piece that helped law enforcement reduce crime was deliberately having those relationships with the people in the communities that need it the most, where the crimes are occurring. And usually those are low-income kind of communities. But you have to deliberately reach the ones that don't have social capital. So the police had to go out and make those connections. There's a lot of good people in those neighborhoods. They're stuck because of their lack of income into some of those poor neighborhoods. So they were dragged kicking and screaming, but using the community and using those aspect of that in law enforcement had a major impact on improving our neighborhoods and reducing crime. And I think the same has to be true for our school. Our school needs to embrace our community. We need to be asking the community to be involved and giving them some capital. Right now, Franklin County is not doing that.
Okay, so now how would we navigate something like PUSH, where we've got 4 people at the table, 2 say get rid of it, 2 say keep it? What measures do we put in place to navigate something?
Well, that's something, our recommendation was that the committee would have to work that out. It's
Well,
not going to be a black and white. There's going to be
If we're the
judgment.
committee, if we are the community, like saying we don't want government involved and then saying, oh, well, let the government figure it out, feels opposite of community involvement. If we're sitting here as the community, how do the 4 of us come up with a final conclusion?
you and I would go in the other room and I'd pester you until you get to the point where you would understand that we need to, the safety of the child is paramount.
Right.
And that has to be our priority. So if we disagree, we should err on the side of safety. So if we're 50-50 on a decision like that.
I was going to say, you're going to leave that room frustrated. I've been in a room with this guy.
But I think here's the problem is I'm saying the same thing. I'm saying that there's somebody in that school who has been abused, who is facing the same parents. And this book creates both empathy in other folks who sit next to her, and it gives her an opportunity to see, I am here.
And we get that person you're talking about the proper resources to deal with those issues, because it's not going to be from a book.
In the book, how we deal with this young lady. So the first thing is we frequently expel her.
This is a character in the book.
But
this isn't the person.
She is so indicative of some of the students I have dealt with that have been expelled, that have been in fights, that have been difficult to teach, that have been pushed to alternative schools, that in the end of this book ends up as a caregiver until she, or is it suggested that she end up as a caregiver. The same folks that end up in these cycles of poverty, of children out of wedlock, of getting a chance to read a book where you see how little control she's had, because many of these things were started by people who were supposed to take care of her and didn't.
And she can be brought back to a point where she can overcome that, but it's not going to come from a book. We're talking about years of counseling to get the person to understand what happened to her was wrong and she was victimized. And we need to actually, it's not something any of us know because we go to a seminar. Mm-hmm. It's something that takes some time of understanding who you are, deal with your feelings and what the outcome of those feelings, the behaviors that are coming from those bad feelings, and learning that it's not your fault. And then you have to build them back up. And it takes years to do that.
Yes.
So it's not going to come from a book.
Yeah, but I think that
I'm
with
gonna
my child
on the podcast part that Kathy has, we've lost her on the feed, and we'll pop her back in. I have the feeling she'll have to regroup. Our time may have come out.
Yeah, and I would say that if my child reads this book, I think hopefully she would gain empathy. Because clearly that's not happening in my house. But what she would be able to do is recognize the signs and, hey, maybe this is the reason why this classmate is having all these social issues.
And that, as a parent, that's a very positive thing, and I would encourage you to do that. But you're probably an exception. People that really engage as parents and really engage their children and actually are directly involved. I probably wasn't as good a parent as I should have been because I was working 2 jobs. I was working shift work, and you can't always be there every minute that you'd like to be, and you end up doing the best you can with what you have. And there's most parents are probably more like that. Back in the 50s and 60s, mom stayed home and dad worked, so there was a parent that was able to engage more. Now we have more both parents working. It's harder to engage that way. It needs to really be, like in your case, it's more of a deliberative action to be more engaging with the child, to make sure and maybe deliberately expose them to those things when you think it's appropriate. Most parents don't think about that. There are parents that do. So now we're talking about, are we really leaving it to the school to raise our kids? And we shouldn't be. I know the school feels that way, and there are examples of parents that are not good parents, but we can't just assume that everybody's a bad parent, so the school has to decide when it's appropriate. The parent still needs to be the leader of that decision.
Well, I have trouble understanding how you don't feel part of the school system.
Well, they're not even talking to me. The only conversation I have with them is when I give my 3-minute presentation at the school board.
What would you like to see from them that would make you feel
community
heard?
Involvement. You reading a book isn't enough. That's not representative of the Franklin County community.
Now, Franklin County, do they offer volunteer opportunities? Franklin County Public Schools.
They do.
So are you allowed to volunteer for anything through the Franklin County Public Schools?
I don't know if I would be or not.
Have you tried?
I have not.
Would you be willing to?
Well, they wouldn't let me now because of the adversarial relationship that's been created. Because I challenged their book, and they had to change their policy because of me. So there are people that do volunteer, and this to them, I'm a thorn in the cap, and simply because I wanted to have a conversation about what's best for our children, and we have yet to have that conversation. I met with Dr. Sears twice when this started, and he, although I like him, he's a nice man. He's probably very professional, but he diverted every judgment evaluation.
What type of racism is this?
He referred back
I
to.
now want to.
He referred back to the school board. As far as he was concerned, these were all school board decisions. And I tried to impress upon him that he is the leader. He's been selected by the school board to provide leadership in regard to these kinds of things. And he would not engage beyond that. So
I can understand that because, first of all, that's a tough position to be in where you have the community saying one thing and then you have parents saying something. The best action would probably be to take action as a whole involving the school board rather than him just saying, all right, I'm going to take care of these books that you've challenged, and then me coming back in immediately and saying, why did you challenge these books?
Well, I don't disagree with him reverting to the school board necessarily, but there is a relationship there, and the school board are part-time employees. They have other jobs. So they have to rely on the information that's provided from school administration to help inform them on making decisions. So the superintendent, I think, is not entirely correct when he says that's strictly their decision. The superintendent clearly has an influence on the school board for these types of matters. And I think he just decided, at least publicly, he decided not to be engaged in that. So they ended up, I asked repeatedly for a report on the books that I challenged, and it wasn't until I think 2 months ago we got the report, and they've provided me nothing in writing. There's no explanation. I mean, they've made it to the point to where it appears the only way to go forward would be to get any of this information instead of having a conversation like we are. It's going to have to be something that's required, that there'd have to be court action, and nobody wins with that. It's just a lot of people are going to spend money. Your tax dollars are going to pay for them to dig their heels in deeper. And I just think this is an opportunity for the school to embrace the community, and they're just not willing to do that because I assume you've worked in organizations where the people in charge, that means something. They have power, they make decisions, and whatever it is, they stick with it. And sometimes it's really hard to break that. To where they understand that maybe we have to look at this a little differently.
Well, I think with any business, it's hard for them to take consideration of people who are standing outside of it. And I think that with the school system, to have an active voice, you have to get in. So volunteering, I would say I would only use the excuse if they don't allow you, but I would say go ahead and volunteer. Say, hey, I would like to help out in the library if possible.
Well, we've done this for 2 years already.
All right.
There's no movement, no budging.
With allowing you to volunteer within the school system?
With regards to talking about what's best for our kids.
All right, let me see if I can. I'm going to pause.
Okay.
Kathy, you're back.
Kathy's
Can you
back.
hear us?
We are back.
Okay.
I don't know what happened.
I think we timed out a little bit. And so right now the discussion has really moved to
the second
Keith,
hour.
Well, Keith, yeah, we're in the second hour, so we're going to close up here in about 20 minutes. We'll end this at 3 o'clock. But Keith has described not feeling welcome in the school system, and now certainly being ostracized by the school system once he's made these complaints The discussion is now shifting kind of towards what would the community like to see? How would you like to see this conversation moved forward? So especially with push, if we use push as the example, you know.
Okay, so let me, that's just about where we left off.
Yes.
The four of us talking about that.
Now I'm steering it back a little bit more, sharpening it. I'll have to confess that as well.
Okay, so we, in my discussion with people about content in these books and all, one of the suggestions that was made to me that it was like, wow, what, you know, that is so simple. Why was that so hard to figure out? Was, so you have this book Push that tells a certain story, but it tells it very graphically. There are books out there that are probably similar, but are not so intense, not so graphic. And that book would probably be easier to accept into the library. It would be easy to digest. If and you know, it's not like there's only one book Push that talks about this very thing. I'm sure there's alternatives. So when it comes to Push or other books similar that have a really intense, graphic, violent, lewd content in it, there's got to be alternatives. There's got to be some alternatives. And that's where the community could really step into play. Is, well, what are the alternatives? Let's go find the alternatives. Let's start examining this and saying, okay, here's 3 choices that could replace Push. Yes. Which one do you want to do it with? And that would be the way to try to get over that hurdle and make everybody happy.
It's good.
Do you feel qualified to do that, to offer that presentation, to find those resources?
Well, what I think Kathy's saying is this is a community decision. Let this community group make that determination. What do you mean qualified?
And I think this goes back to what I believe media specialists do, but it's easy to say, let's get something better. It's hard to present something better. It's how presidential candidates always lose to unknown candidate, you know, until we actually put a face on the candidate. Like this other book that offers the same kind of, how do we find it?
So there's all kinds of common sense. You'd go out there and you type in Push and similar books. I mean, you try to find, you know, that kind of content in the books. Or, I mean, gosh, people browse all the time and dig up information. So would it take some time and effort? Yeah. But I mean, you're a parent. Brian, you said you've read the book. You both read the book, right? Push? Okay. So now you know what the book is like. So now you could go out there and say, well, let me see, you know, I want my daughter to know about this, but I don't necessarily want to read that book. Let me see what alternative is out there. How close can I come to it?
And
that suggestion was made to me when somebody in the Bedford County schools was wanting to challenge a book that was required reading in AP English. And they said, and she says, well, why can't they read about slavery? Why can't they read Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington and go visit right down the road, go visit where he grew up? I mean, that would be very educational and very similar. It just didn't have all the graphic stuff in it. So, you know, it's a highly educational book, and it really talks about how he pulled himself up by the bootstraps and went from slavery to Tuskegee.
Now, I think I would oppose that just because
I think I would too.
I feel like that watered down version of slavery has hurt us.
Even the watered down version that Booker himself sells of his life. His father.
But it was written by a man who actually experienced it. It was written, so you can't discredit that.
We can't discredit it, but comparing it,
he
person
lived it.
He was emancipated at 10, compared to like
Somebody who
Frederick Douglass, who emancipated himself at 18.
Right, so
And
there's
then had
another
to spend
example.
the next 10
Right.
years.
I'm just throwing out examples
Yes.
here, so
She's
that's
throwing
all.
out
I'm
a-
just giving examples.
Yes,
I don't
well-
know personal
It's an option,
feelings
and
about
you're
Booker
not
T.
considering the
Washington.
option.
Well, I guess that's where we
Yeah.
get into this idea is there's nuance inside the options. Some of the beauty in Push is the beginning of it is so terribly written because she cannot speak well. She's writing in her own journal and she's barely literate. And as the book goes on, as she actually engages in some classes, as some of her positive interactions with adults are starting to work, she becomes more literate and the journal actually improves as she's writing. So this idea that even in the book, even in someone who is in this dire situation, there is growth in their understanding and their learning is something that's expressed in this book. So not just that there are people who experience these sexual traumas, but that not giving up on these people is something that needs to be important. And I don't know how you just replace that, and I also don't know why you can lay it at our feet and pretend that those things are absent in this literature.
They're not absent. It's about what's appropriate at the right age.
Yeah.
And our children, again, it goes back to context. But
Yeah.
you asked, what can the school do? What would we do
Yes.
to accomplish the goal of including the community? I would think number one would be they need to find out why are so many parents removing their children from the school. They haven't asked them. You know, the parents, there's a reason, and the ones I speak to end up doing it out of real frustration. They're getting pushback instead of getting cooperation and trying to resolve whatever their issues are. So they haven't asked the parents that are removing their children. So how are you going to address the problem when you don't know what the problem is, or you refuse to accept what they're telling you the problem is? And that's a common issue for any business or people in charge. They just deny the things. That's why so many police chiefs lost their job, is because they wouldn't consider that really what we were doing was part of the problem. And that's what it'd be. My recommendation would be the school needs to look at the reasons why so many of these parents have removed their kids. I want us to have a good CTE program. We do have a good person in charge of it, and it would help our students and our community if we had a better facility for that program. But I'm of the opinion, why should we keep spending money on a school that's losing students? You know, we need to solve this to make the school better so that parents want to bring their children back. And you're not going to be able to do that if you don't find out why they took the children out.
Yeah.
And
But-
I also feel that there needs to be more members in the community willing to, whether they're have kids in the school or not, but just be willing to volunteer time in the
Yes.
school and volunteer and attend PTA or PTO
Yes.
meetings. You know,
That's
attend,
actually
you know.
what we were getting at when you were, I guess, when you got cut off. Well, we were talking about volunteerism because I do volunteer in my kids' schools. I've had children in Franklin County Public Schools for the last 16 years. My youngest is 9. My oldest is 20. And I have one in between who is 15 years old. And I do like the fact that my son does not have the option to check out Push in elementary school. But my daughter will have access to check out Push before she's 18. She's 15 now, and if she does decide to check it out, I will be notified.
But you always, as a parent, you always have the opportunity to take her to the public library and get that book.
I do.
You're not denied anything by not having these books in the K through 12 school system. Doesn't deny the parent access. They still have access at the public library.
That's true. With having a child who can't quite drive yet, she's limited to when I can take her.
Well, if you
But-
wanted her to have it, I'm sure you'd find a way to get it to her.
Yeah. And if she wanted to have it, I'm sure she would find a way to get to it.
All right, so we're closing out. I'm gonna start with there was a section in this missing, and so when I publish the first run, I'll let you guys get a chance to make sure that with that missing section, it doesn't lose any context. Make sure I do an invite back, and then I'd like to see just do a round table and give you all an option to close out. I'll start with Brian and Kathy, and we'll close with you and close out the show with any last thoughts.
Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity to engage with the community. Because I was curious, as a parent in Franklin County Public Schools, I didn't really question what my kids had access to, because I always felt that I was involved. Even a shout out to my children's elementary school librarian, Miss Comer, who has been with all three of my children at Lee and Wade, and I've engaged in conversations with her to the point where I trust her ability to I choose what my kids have access to. So I'd just like to add that, and thank you for having me on here to engage in this conversation.
Keith?
All right, Darnell, thank you for asking me to do this. I've enjoyed it. It's nice to be able to have the conversation, even though we might not have convinced anybody. Maybe before this is all over, we'll be closer on these issues. But I would remind you that I guess the big issue as far as locally is the community at large. The law requires that to be a motivating factor for the school. And pervasively vulgar and educationally unsuitable material is legally allowed to be removed from the school. There's no legal limitation to be able to do that. And I would also make people aware, if this isn't an option for them, that we have 3 private schools in Franklin County, or one's outside of Franklin County. Christian Heritage Academy, Smith Mountain Lake Christian Academy, and Faith Christian School. I have friends that actually take their kids to Faith Christian School it's in Roanoke County, right off of 220. When they commute to work, they take their kids. And also, if there's 1,000 parents in Franklin County that are homeschooling, and a good way, and I don't know that much about homeschooling, but I've tried to learn more, and it really is a very effective thing, and it's not as much work. The parent has to put some work into it initially, but you basically buy curriculums that are not that expensive for your kid at the age, and you have state tests, and my understanding is those are very simple tests that any kind of education work would prepare a student for those tests. It's far below what you would want for your child, but it's up to the parent. So there's one resource for homeschooling to be able to look at options would be a website called the Home Educators Association of Virginia, and it's heav.org if you want to access that and look at that option as a parent. So I would hope that we could be my ultimate hope that we can have a stronger, more successful public school. But clearly some parents are not happy with that, so these are options. Thank
Kathy?
you.
Okay, Brian and Darnell, it was my pleasure meeting you today.
Yes, me too.
And I think we did have a really good, productive discussion on this topic. And one thing I'm really thankful for is, when you go before the school board, you get 3 minutes to talk in front of 8 stone-faced people.
Yes.
No response, no feedback, nothing. And then they go on about their business for that evening on the agenda. So having this back and forth is wonderful, and I'd love to see more of it. And thank you for having me on the program.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been Misunderstood.
Scrambled like a burned out candle with half the wick missing and a nothing for flame. Give me a savior that takes me away. Give me a blanket and a space for my head. When time descends like an old stage curtain on the back of my eyelids, I'd be any place instead. just kept a-rambling, talking 19 to the dozen, like a worn-out needle, tripping right across that groove. He said there's a silence that's creeping in darkness, but why look for answers when there's nothing to prove? Give me a savior that takes me away. Give me a blanket and a space for my head when time descends like an old stage curtain